spread out a little bit.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Scott's a tough act to follow. He's got great shoe game. He has no notes, very relaxed. So we'll try to get this thing going. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a career sports guy for 13 years, working for the NFL internationally. I was in Germany, did a stint in Scotland, then Mexico City. Worked for Major League Soccer for a number of years, running the international business there. Started the NFL practice at Wasserman with my nephew, Andrew Luck, who was #1 overall pick in 2012. Then became the CEO at U.S. Soccer for a number of years, dealt with a lot of interesting issues during that time frame, and we got a lot done. Very, very proud of that effort. And then joined Galway about 3 years ago. So Galway is a holding company that owns risk and wealth management businesses. We're private equity backed, and we have multiple businesses in the sports and entertainment space, and I run those businesses and the platform that connects them. So we have an all-star panel here today. Lyle Ayes is the co-founder of Variance Capital. They are the owners of both the Houston Dynamo and the Houston Dash. He's also formerly with Redbird Capital, and they're also investors in League One Volleyball, very germane to today's conversation. Sarah Toussaint, former colleague of mine, an amazing investor. She is on the cap table with the NWSL NC Courage. She is a recent investor in Querétaro in Liga MX. She is an investor and a co-CEO of TMJ Sports, which is a really interesting business. They represent 250 female soccer athletes, both on their contract work, but also on their marketing work. And you're also, I think, a co-founder of Underdog, I believe?
I was a managing director.
Managing director of Underdog. So a lot of interesting roles in her background. Ali Wagner, a co-founder and investor in BayFC, the chief strategy officer of the World Sevens tournament, which is an amazing initiative that we're going to be talking about a little bit here as well. Also a decorated women's national team player, and she won a national championship at Santa Clara in 2001. I think you had the winning goal to secure that victory, I believe. So
I love that you led with that over my gold medals. Thank you, Santa Clara.
And gold medals, I should mention that as well. So well done, Ali. All right, so we'll kick this off. Lyle, I'm going to start with you. Okay, so what makes women's sports such an exciting space for ownership and investment today?
I think it's rare in sports to say that a property is undervalued. There's a ton of value, there's a ton of safety. I think women's sports is still undervalued relative to the opportunity. So as an investor, that's pretty exciting, right? You come into one of the established leagues, NFL, NBA, et cetera, you are paying full value for what you get. And I think women's sports, we've seen a huge uptick in valuations over the last couple years, but I still look at them as growth assets where you can still get growth-like returns, and that's very rare in sports.
Sarah, same question for you.
Yeah, underscore that. I like a bargain, and so I invested in the league for 4 seasons ago, right? So I feel pretty good about that purchase. For me, it's a couple things. Women's sports, specifically soccer, the growth opportunity in terms of the global fan base and the player base, the talent pool. FIFA apparently announced 29 million women and girls play all over the world. They're predicted to see 60 million in the next few years. I mean, that's a huge growth opportunity. NWSL specifically, Sportico just announced, or the NWSL announced and Sportico reported this morning that there's a couple of media rights expansions today. So we're going to see, I think, 200 plus matches into next season versus 160, so that's exciting. And it's just a good game. Like, it's just fun to watch. I never played, I'm kind of a poser that way, but it's just a really beautiful game to watch. So that's my take on it.
Ali, as a former player, what inspired you to get involved?
Oh boy. On the business side, I mean, I fell in love with soccer really as like a 4-year-old. So, it was always in my blood, but on the business side, it was really, I would say it was apparent that the investment wasn't there when I was a player. And I mean, I'll never forget in 2019, I actually was about to go call the Women's World Cup And I was with I've told this story before, but I was with my husband, my brother-in-law, and my father, and a friend, all men. And I said, look, I don't understand it. If people would just invest in this space, it would be it'd be massive. It'd be one of the biggest events in the world. And they all looked at me and they all said, Allie, there's a lot of smart people in the world. If they saw that it was undervalued, they would be investing in this space. And flash forward, to, I would say about, post-COVID is when you saw the recognition that the opportunity was there. And the opportunity is there because of the different, growth levers that we can pull. When you take away the fact that, or we now have an environment where there's no gatekeeper to what you can consume. With the digital media landscape, we now have a platform where people can consume our product. That didn't exist before. And then you start to talk about the growth in the global game and the acceleration of talent. That's the player, the entertainment level that will evolve over time that makes the product that more compelling. And then you start to look at the way that these players can tell their stories. And we have been, if anything, in women's sports, we've been great storytellers because we haven't had that broad distribution. So now you've got this digital landscape that can pull that lever. You've got these players that are seeing incredible, I would say, growth in the way they play. No way I could compete right now in the NWSL. No way I could compete on the international stage. That's how much better and more powerful these players are. We saw it firsthand at our World Sevens event in Portugal. I mean, the talent is I think, the best in the world. And then you factor in that it is the #1 sport in the world. And so we've only scratched the surface in the market. And we're going to be able to take this game to, you look at Asia, you look at China, you look at Brazil. These are the markets that are budding, and they're the ones that are going to prove to have outsized growth, even as we continue to invest here in the NWSL. And we're going to bring that talent here and hopefully drive, I think, continue to be the most compelling product in this landscape.
Sarah, with TMJ, I mean, and kind of layering on what Allie's saying, you represent all these players. Your company represents all these players sort of across the globe. I mean, they're not just in the States. I think you were telling me many of them are in Latin America, many in Europe. This funnel of female talent seems to be growing at an exponential sort of pace. And clearly that's probably behind your business model. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I used to work at Wells Fargo. I'll tell you a little bit, like the origin story of how I got to TMJ. I was at Wells Fargo on the brand side. The co-founder there, and I sponsor the Mexican national team in MLS. And so the co-founder of TMJ had really strong talent on the women's game for sure, in Mexico, and also the relationships with the men's side. So started working there, and that was in 2017. And they had maybe 20 soccer players, mostly out of Mexico and Latin America, Venezuela. And by the time I left Wells Fargo in 2022, they had about 120. And that's when I said, oh my God, I want to invest, and the growth has been tremendous. TMJ has been kind of under the radar compared to a lot of other agencies out there. And it's been really exciting to see the agency grow. It's been exciting. And the agency actually was founded accidentally. The co-founder found a scholarship for a player to play in D1. She was really good enough to be scouted out of Europe. And she asked him, hey, you helped me find this scholarship to play. Can you help me find an agent? And there was no agents representing women's soccer players. And I think to this day, there's only 5% of all of FIFA's agents that represent women. And so that's, you talk about underinvestment. Even the agents that represent women's soccer players don't really exist. And so that's an opportunity for TMJ for sure. And so we're taking advantage of that.
I mean, look, for all you aspiring agents out there, 5% FIFA registered agents, I think that speaks volumes for the opportunity and the runway that's available in the space on that front. Lyle, as a kind of a traditional investor, Barron's, your experience at Redbird, obviously with the Dash, obviously with League One, what are investors looking for in these other emerging markets that makes it attractive from a capital perspective? Are there other sports out there? I was having a conversation earlier about softball, in the States, and whether that's an opportunity for a professional league. What else do you see out there that would make sense to investors?
Yeah, I'm trying not to just talk my book, but the League One volleyball was very interesting because It's not the largest sport like soccer, but it's one of the largest growing sports from a youth perspective, which is always, you know, a nice tailwind to see. And there was no professional league. So I was saying to Allie on the side stage, you know, what's so interesting to me about the NWSL is the U.S. women and the league, if they're not the best, they're close to the best, right? And we're owners of the MLS. We love the Dynamo, but I don't think anyone would confuse the MLS as the most talented soccer league in the world. And I think across some of these women's leagues, you have that opportunity here. So League One Volleyball, which just launched off of the back of the Paris Olympics, is the most talented league in the world. You know, the NWSL, I'm biased, but I would say it is the most talented league. Now, it needs to maintain that position, right? That's you know, that's another challenge. But I don't think the best players are at least not considering the NWSL. And so, if you can find an opportunity, because consumers and fans are smart, to have the best talent with capital behind it, then I think you have a real opportunity. So those are the two that we've invested in. You mentioned softball. I think another important thing is softball is the best version of itself in the women's sport, right? Men aren't playing softball. Women are better at softball than men, right? And so I think that's important as well, because the consumers, as I said, are smart. So if they see the best product, they will get behind it. And if the consumers get behind it, then brands will get behind it, and I think investors will get behind it.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking earlier, you mentioned the importance of the youth system in some of these emerging leagues as well, and leaning into that, you know, entire population of people who are playing sport at a young age and be able to grow from that into a professional league from a capital perspective.
Yeah, and I think kids want to get into you know, sports that they see, maybe if not a future in, they see a, you know, a popularity around, right? So I think the fact that there is now a professional professional volleyball league will lead to more kids wanting to play volleyball, right? The fact that the NWSL exists and is thriving will lead to more girls interested in playing soccer and having these aspirations of being a professional. And so I think it's very important, male or female, but you know, if there is an opportunity for these kids and it is cool and they can be proud of, you know, that professional pathway, you'll see increased youth participation.
Ali, let's talk a little bit about World Sevens. I mean, what's the origin story there? You know, what opportunity did you all see that led to the formation of this?
Yeah, I mean, just to tag on real quick on the data of the youth participation, after the World Cup in France 2019, girls playing soccer in France rose by 49%. And so I mean, that's just one data point to support it. So that is top of mind clearly for, I think, the NWSL. As it relates to World Sevens, you know, what we saw and what you heard from Lauren is that right now the NWSL and the clubs, like, they need to focus on their core business. And they need to really drive, you know, the 11v11 product, fill their stadiums. How do they grow their fan base? How do they grow their media deal? Those are the big levers. And with World Sevens, there's an opportunity to come in and be additive to this environment. By 7v7, this is a new format that engages a younger demographic. So coming out of event 1, 48% of our audience was 18 to 35. That is the audience that all of our leagues across the world, NWSL here in the United States, but all of the leagues of women's football want to target. They want to hit them. And it's in a way that it meets them where they are. It's digestible content. It's entertaining. We had 11 goals over 90 minutes on average across that first event. And those are moments that perform incredibly well on social media, again, live well on digital. And it's something that people can understand very quickly and help continue to grow the fan base. So while the clubs are focusing on you know, building their business, we provide a platform where Unrivaled's an incredible format, but what Unrivaled isn't doing is leveraging the IP of current clubs. So in World Sevens, we are bringing in, you know, whatever brand. In the first one, we had Man City, Man United, and now they are exposing their brands to the global game because this is a global platform. It's the first of its kind in women's football to bring clubs together that don't compete outside of their confederation. So imagine a tournament in which Man City is playing a team from Mexico, that's playing a team from Japan, the US. Like that is where this is trending, that's where we scale it, but the vision really is to be additive to the environment. How do we grow the fan base of women's football? How do we engage them in a more meaningful way and hit that younger demographic to, again, expand the market? How do we then, bring together the top clubs to compete so we can put these players front and center? The players are the ones that are going to go back to their 11v11 market, and fans are going to fall in love with them in the 7v7 format, and they're going to follow them home. And so now we get to star build and provide a platform that, again, is additive to the environment. That's the goal, that's the vision. And oh, by the way, build it for the players, because I was a player growing up in the system. Now it's become very robotic, for better or for worse, in how we execute a game plan. 7v7 liberates the player. It liberates that freedom of expression and gets these players to fall back in love with the game. And when you see that on the pitch, you as a fan fall in love with it again. And so this is just like part of the flywheel. We talk about the flywheel of business. This is a much bigger flywheel that we are hoping to help continue to accelerate the growth of. And when Lauren said it's a steep curve, like we're hoping we can turn that into a hockey stick by coming to this environment and help lift up all the different revenue streams, but awareness and market reach of these players and clubs.
Speaking of awareness, are you on, or is the tournament on FIFA or UEFA, or you're talking about playing outside your confederation?
Yeah.
Has it piqued the interest of some of the confederations or governing bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that is interesting to the governing bodies, and watching the different form of competition that is football. And that's the beauty of women's football. We benefit from the tradition of the sport, but we're not beheld by the same constraints that men's football would be. So we can innovate, we can try things, and that's really key, I think, in this growth phase in women's football in particular. Women's sports broadly, but women's football in particular being that #1 sport in the world.
Right. Lyle, what business models, revenue streams will be most important for long-term growth? We're in an interesting era from a media perspective. Obviously, influencers, socials having a huge role. With leagues starting kind of from scratch, there's an opportunity to be, AI native, more digitally focused. What do you see as the growth going forward?
Yeah, look, for emerging leagues generally, I think most of them fail because their business plan requires media rights, and those media rights never materialize at the quantum they would like to think and on the timeline they would like, right? So best case scenario, investors continue to equity fund those businesses and watch their returns go down. Worst case, the leagues fold, right? And so the NWSL, for example, is I think past that risk, hopefully. But everything else, I think, is secondary to getting media rights where it needs to be, right? If the media rights aren't there, you can't pay the players. If you can't pay the players, then a competitor league in Europe is going to kind of supersede the league. And so I think on established leagues like the NWSL, media rights are most important. I think in emerging leagues, you need other revenue drivers beyond media rights in order to kind of get that firm footing. So whether it's compelling content, whether it's sponsorship, most of these end up being local events, so you need to be selling tickets. But I think media rights is a luxury once you've made it, but once you've made it, that's how to step function up.
Yeah, no, and Sarah, your background at Wells Fargo, in the partnership side of the equation, where do you see partnerships and sponsorships fueling both financial stability, but also sort of cultural relevance?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's media is #1. I think where brands come in, for my perspective, it's at least for the consumer, having brand support is like validating. It's this property, this club, this team, this talent has been vetted to the point where a business is willing to put money behind it. So to me, it just adds this layer of credibility. And certainly, the sponsorship revenue is another way to firm up that sustainable growth for the clubs. But in terms of cultural relevancy, I'm trying to think, Wells Fargo is not like a hot brand, right? But we did some really cool things at least in the men's soccer space, that did break through.
Don Oven.
Yes,
That was great.
That did break into some cultural. There was a couple spots if you really follow soccer and follow U.S. soccer and MLS. There was a couple of. There were two campaigns that I worked on in 2014 World Cup, 2018 World Cup that made. The first one was a very pleasant, very fun, cheeky. Landon Donovan, U.S. captain, the national team. Anyway, I won't go long into it. Just look it up. Google Wells Fargo, Landon Donovan, 2014. It was a great
All I'm
commercial.
picturing is Landon Donovan's water. Remember the water fountain? Yeah, that was.
Yes.
Right. Look
So,
that one up.
so that was one moment. And then in 2018, the U.S. men's team unfortunately did not qualify for the World Cup. And this was also a moment of political tension. And as sponsors of the Mexican national team, which is on the men's side probably more popular in the U.S., especially among the Latino market, we decided to have another campaign around basically Landon supporting Mexico, and that was bonkers. It made international headlines. We had Donovan rooting for Mexico, and that's how many years is this now? And people are still talking about both commercials. So anyway, Wells Fargo is a non-exciting brand, was able to like break through some of that with some really fun, creative, maybe controversial creative pieces. But I think if everybody's walking around with Nike, Adidas, so much cooler brands have an easier time. But I'm pretty proud of that work.
And one of the, just thinking through the brand impact, I mean, 30% uplift and engagement with brands when they do co-brand alongside our platforms. World Sevens, NWSL, their clubs. So that 30% uplift is massive, and especially in a world where data is king now. And I think that's one of the things that we were talking about offline yesterday is just, sports teams' valuations. I mean, it could be, we could argue that maybe they are undervalued across all the different professional sports leagues because of their ability to aggregate this data over time. And hopefully it's in women's space, obviously we need brands to continue to understand that story, but know that we can deliver that data back to the brand. And we can hit that target demo, which by the way, is trending more towards 60% women per the Deloitte, I believe it was the Deloitte, or maybe it was the Nielsen PepsiCo study, right? By 2030, 60% of the fans in women's football will be women. Women have the purchasing power. So, continuing to tell that story is I think part of what we have to do in order to get brands to understand the real value to be extracted.
Yeah.
Kind of, and I think we have time for maybe one more question here, but we'll go quickly. But in both Houston and in the Bay Area, how do you guys differentiate, and drive cultural relevance or community engagement in a
Is there
busy
any
market?
question, Will? Come on, the Bay Area and Houston. What do you got, Lyle?
Look, I think it's easier in some ways to differentiate as the only women's sport in Houston versus being one of multiple men's sports, right? Because consumers do have a choice, right? And it is very hot down in Houston, so you have to give them a compelling product and have cultural relevance. But Houston's a very diverse market. I think each of our clubs has a very diverse roster, which is kind of helpful, and not necessarily by design, but I just think helps the cultural relevance. And I think you just in anything in sports, you have to give the fans a reason to care. Yeah. And if you do, they will care, and the brands will care, and then you have a sustainable club.
Yeah, I would just say we've really leaned into the story of innovation in the Bay, and that we are a bit of disruptors. And so we have some of the brightest minds, and to be able to partner with those companies and start to improve resources, that's top of mind. But it's also, like you said, we have an incredibly diverse demographic, and coming in, Valkyries were not on the radar just yet, and coming in and being that place where young kids can go, boys and girls, and see a pathway to professionalism. It didn't exist for women. And now we've got it, luckily, up in San Francisco. We've got it in the South Bay, but telling that story. And it really does happen. It's not just a talking point. The anecdotal evidence of these kids coming up and saying, I actually had no idea I could play professional football. And now they've fallen in love with it, and they fall in love with the game. That's part of our why, and bringing the community together behind, I think, these incredible athletes, but again, more importantly, inspiring them and making this a place where everyone feels comfortable to show up and support the game.
That's great. The light's blinking at me, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But thank you, and appreciate all the valuable insight.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.